Jack sat at the farthest edge of the alien warlords' council table, his back straight and his gaze fixed on the group of alien overlords gathered before him. They laughed among themselves, their voices low and guttural, a stark contrast to the pristine technology that surrounded them. None of them even glanced in his direction, their attention solely focused on the vast holographic map in the center of the room. It was as if he wasn't there at all. It was a mistake, he thought, though he didn't let it show. He didn't need their acknowledgement, not yet. Jax knew he had a purpose here, whether they realized it or not. The moment they did, it would be too late. The warlord's chief, Korak, an enormous alien with scales like polished steel and the demeanor of a beast, slammed his fist on the table. The humans are nothing but scavengers, crawling on the dirt of their backwater planet. Their time has come. We will eradicate them all. A ripple of agreement ran through the room, but Jax's eyes remained cold and focused. They spoke of his people as if they were no more than insects. But Jax wasn't just any human, and he wasn't here to be eradicated. Across from him, Xylena, a wiry strategist with sharp features and piercing violet eyes, studied him intently. Unlike the others, she saw beyond the surface. She hadn't spoken yet, but her gaze lingered on Jax as if searching for something. He didn't flinch. He'd been trained to hide his true nature. It's been so long since we've encountered a species that we could conquer with ease, Korak continued, his voice booming. These humans, with their primitive technology and weak bodies, won't even know what hit them. Jax flexed his fingers, feeling the rough calluses of his palms, the silent testament to countless hours of combat training. He could already hear the thrum of the arena in his mind, the distant echoes of the combat trials he'd endure. They thought he was weak, that he didn't belong here with these intergalactic predators, but they were wrong. The doors slid open, and two hulking guards dragged a shackled human prisoner into the room. The prisoner was bruised and bloodied, eyes vacant, as if the fight had already left him. He collapsed on the floor, panting heavily. Your next opponent, Korak boomed. The human will fight in our trials. If he survives, we'll consider him a prize for our collection. Xylena's eyes flicked from the prisoner to Jax, who was now standing, his posture straight and purposeful. She'd noticed it earlier, the way he carried himself. Humans weren't meant to survive in this arena. Yet, Jax did not seem to doubt his own strength. Jax glanced at the prisoner before his eyes returned to Korak, his voice calm, almost mocking. You call this a trial? The room fell silent for a moment as Korak narrowed his eyes. You think you're any different? You'll be dead like the others before the end of the day. Jax didn't respond. There was no need. His actions would speak louder than words. The alien warlords debated amongst themselves, their voices becoming unintelligible in the chaos of their alien tongue. Jax tuned them out. He focused on his breathing, the pulse of his heartbeat, the sensation of the cold metal floor beneath his boots. His mind was already shifting, preparing for what was to come. Let's test the human's mettle, Korak declared, interrupting the conversation. He gestured toward the prisoner, his voice filled with mockery. Let's see if he can survive our first trial. The prisoner was dragged into the center of the room, where a massive holographic gate appeared, revealing a series of alien beasts, a variety of predators bred for hunting. Jax's eyes scanned the creatures, noting their size, speed, and behavior. Korak's laughter rumbled through the air. You'll have to face these beasts, human. You won't last long, but I'm curious to see how you struggle. Jax didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate and calm, as if this was no different from any of the countless trials he had faced before. The alien beasts snarled, their eyes flashing with hunger. As the gate opened, the beasts charged, their fangs gleaming in the dim light. The prisoner screamed and scrambled, but within seconds, the creatures overwhelmed him. His cries were cut short, his body torn apart in a flurry of fangs and claws. Jax stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding before him. The chaos did not faze him, it was simply the beginning of his own test. He could feel the pulse of the arena beneath his boots, the same pulse that had driven him for years. Every muscle in his body was primed, his mind honed. The creatures turned their attention to him. Without warning, he lunged forward, his movements a blur. The first beast met its end with a swift strike, its throat slashed open by the hidden blade Jax had concealed in his sleeve. Another beast lunged at him, its claws swiping through the air, but Jax sidestepped effortlessly, driving a knife deep into its ribs. He moved with the precision of a predator, each strike calculated, each movement deliberate. The aliens in the room fell silent as they watched, their laughter dying in their throats. They had expected a weak, frightened human, one that would be slaughtered in moments. But Jax was no ordinary human. He was something they had never encountered before. The final beast, a massive creature with jet-black scales and glowing red eyes, charged at him with terrifying speed. Jax met its gaze, his breath steady. As the beast lunged, he twisted out of its path, his blade flashing as he plunged it deep into the creature's side. It howled in pain, its monstrous form collapsing to the ground in a heap. The arena fell still. Korak's eyes widened, his confidence shaken. "What, are you?" Jax stood over the bodies of the fallen beasts, his chest rising and falling steadily. His eyes met Korak's, and for the first time, the alien warlord saw something he hadn't expected. The human wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to win. "I'm the last thing you'll ever underestimate," Jax said, his voice low and cold. Xylena, who had watched from the beginning, leaned forward. "This human," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's not what he seems." But Korak didn't hear her. His fury was building, and his fists clenched. The game had changed. This human was no longer a mere pawn. Jax had begun his journey. And it was just the beginning. The alien city stretched above him in impossible spires, its metallic sheen casting distorted reflections in the dim twilight. Jax stood at the edge of the arena, his muscles still tight from the fight. The sounds of the crowd's roars had faded into the background, but the image of Korak's stunned expression remained sharp in his mind. He had done it, he had proven his point. But it was only the beginning. He glanced at the others, his fellow captives, humans and aliens alike, shackled together in a small holding pen. They watched him, their eyes filled with a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief. The humans had never seen anything like his display of combat prowess, and the aliens, they were beginning to realize that their assumptions about humanity were wrong. Xylena lingered by the edge of the pen, her eyes never leaving Jax. The glint of curiosity in her violet gaze was unmistakable, but there was something more, something darker that hinted at a far deeper interest. Jax didn't trust her, but he knew better than to ignore her presence. She would be useful, whether she realized it or not. A loud clanging sound echoed through the air, followed by the opening of a massive gate at the far end of the arena. The roar of the crowd surged again as the alien guards began to drag another unfortunate victim into the ring, a massive beast, more terrifying than the last, its scales reflecting the dull light like a black mirror. Korak's voice boomed across the arena, addressing the crowd. "The human has proven himself, but it was only a fluke." He gestured toward the beast. "This trial is the true test of his strength. Will he survive, or will he become another notch on the tally of our victories?" Jax stepped forward, every inch of him alive with anticipation. This wasn't about survival anymore, this was about asserting dominance. He was no mere animal, and these creatures needed to understand that. He turned his head slightly, meeting Xylena's gaze. She hadn't moved, but her eyes flickered with something akin to respect, or was it calculation? "I'll survive," Jax said, his voice low but steady. "You'd better," Xylena replied. "Or you'll end up like the last one." She didn't offer him advice or encouragement. She simply stated the facts. Jax appreciated that. The beast snarled, its eyes glowing an unnatural red, and Jax's muscles tensed. This was going to be different. He could feel the weight of its gaze, the predatory, hungry stare that promised death. But there was something else in the air, something Jax couldn't quite place, a sense of something more, a whisper, a stirring in his gut. This wasn't just a test. This was a message. The crowd's roars grew louder, a sea of alien voices chanting for blood. But Jax wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about what came next. The creature lunged, its jaws snapping shut with a sound that could break bone, but Jax was already moving. He sidestepped, his body fluid and agile, as if he were one with the arena itself. His hand slid to his side, where a blade had been hidden beneath the tattered remnants of his prison tunic. The blade cut through the air like a whisper, driving into the creature's side with pinpoint accuracy. It howled, an unearthly screech that reverberated through the arena, but Jax didn't hesitate. He pivoted, shifting his weight effortlessly as he drove the blade deeper. The beast collapsed with a final, guttural growl, its eyes dimming as it fell to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Korak's anger was palpable. He stood at the center of the arena, fists clenched, his alien features contorted in a scowl. "Impossible," he muttered, barely audible over the shifting murmurs of the crowd. "This human has no place in our trials." Xylena's voice broke through the tension, soft but deliberate. "I told you. He's different." The other aliens looked at her, confusion flickering in their eyes. They hadn't heard her speak like this before. The intensity of her observation didn't go unnoticed, and Jax felt a stirring of something new, a recognition. She was beginning to see him not just as a threat to their pride, but as a symbol of something larger. Something they couldn't yet understand. Korak turned to her, his patience thinning. "You've been watching him closely, Xylena. Do you truly believe he's worth our time?" Xylena didn't flinch. "I don't think we've fully grasped the nature of this human. He's more than just a survivor. He's a warrior." Korak scoffed, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. Jax could feel it. His actions, his defiance, it was all beginning to chip away at their arrogance. The arrogance that had kept them at the top of the food chain for so long. Jax wiped the blood from his blade and sheathed it. He didn't need to say anything. The message had been sent, loud and clear. He wasn't some cowering animal to be hunted. He was the one doing the hunting now. Xylena stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You're a puzzle, human. I've never encountered anyone like you before." Jax met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Then you're just as foolish as the rest of them," he said, his voice low, almost dangerous. "Because once you figure me out, it'll be too late." For a moment, Xylena didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering his words more carefully than she had before. "You speak with the arrogance of someone who knows they have more power than they're letting on." Jax smirked, the smallest of movements. "Maybe I'm just getting started." Before Xylena could respond, the arena doors opened once again, and a new figure entered. This one was different, more intimidating. A warlord. A leader. The alien was taller than any Jax had seen so far, his armor gleaming in the dim light, and his presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. The alien's eyes locked on Jax, and there was no mistaking the hatred in them. "Enough of these trials," the warlord's voice boomed, its power resonating in every word. "It's time for the real test." Jax's blood ran cold. This was no mere gladiatorial contest. It was something far more dangerous. And he was walking straight into it. The massive warlord's presence filled the arena, its air thick with tension. Jax's senses sharpened as the figure approached, his footsteps echoing on the metallic floor. The new challenger was taller than the rest, his silhouette framed by the dim, cold light of the arena. A dark energy radiated off him, the kind that made even the fiercest warriors hesitate. Jax didn't flinch. "This is the end of your little spectacle, human," the warlord's voice boomed, each word deliberate and menacing. "Your little games end here." Jax's grip tightened around his blade, a weapon he had used too many times to count. His skin still tingled from the last kill, the electric rush of battle coursing through him, but this time was different. This wasn't just another fight, it was a challenge to his very existence. The warlord, who was easily 3 times Jax's size, towered over him. His armor gleamed, dark and unyielding, and his face remained a mask of cold indifference. His eyes, however, were all too human in their rage. "You think you've won something, little human?" The warlord's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You think your little victories have any meaning in this world? Your kind is nothing. Weak. Doomed to extinction." Jax said nothing. He didn't need to. His actions would speak louder than words. The warlord stepped forward, the sound of his boots grinding on the metal floor as though the arena itself were trembling beneath him. Jax stood firm, waiting for the first move. This wasn't a fight he could afford to lose. Not now. The crowd fell silent, the anticipation so thick it was almost tangible. The warlord's reputation was legendary. He had killed more than 100 beings in the arena, each death adding to his monstrous legacy. But Jax had already shown that he wasn't like the others. The warlord knew it. The room knew it. Jax's very presence, his survival, was a defiance that couldn't be ignored. Without warning, the warlord lunged, a blur of motion so fast that Jax barely had time to react. The massive arm swung toward him, a fist like a boulder aimed for his chest. Jax twisted to the side, the wind of the warlord's attack singing through his hair, but his foot caught on the uneven surface of the arena. The impact rattled his bones. The warlord roared, a primal sound that seemed to echo from the depths of his chest. "You cannot escape me, human." His voice rumbled like thunder, shaking the ground beneath them. Jax gritted his teeth, using the momentum to roll to the side. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was learning. Every movement, every strike, every second of combat was a lesson, a moment in time where he could piece together the warlord's weaknesses, where he could find a way to make this fight his own. "You're no different from the others," Jax muttered, as his muscles fired into motion. His blade was out before the warlord could swing again. A sharp, calculated thrust aimed for the warlord's unguarded side. The blade slid across the massive alien's armor, leaving a glint of silver in its wake, but it barely scratched the surface. The warlord smirked. "You'll die like all the rest." Jax's eyes narrowed. His strategy was simple: outlast him, tire him, and exploit his mistakes. The warlord was strong, but strength wasn't everything. Speed. Precision. Endurance. Those were Jax's advantages. He circled, waiting, each movement deliberate and controlled. His breath was steady, his mind clear. He didn't need to show all of his cards yet. The time would come when he would strike. The warlord lunged again, faster this time, his fist cutting through the air like a wrecking ball. Jax ducked, the blow whistling past him, and immediately retaliated, slashing the warlord's side once more. This time, there was a hiss of pain, a crack in the invincible armor. A growl rumbled deep within the warlord's throat, his eyes blazing with fury. He swung again, and this time Jax didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike, using the warlord's own momentum against him, bringing the blade up beneath the warlord's armored ribs. The crowd held its breath. The warlord stumbled back, eyes wide in surprise. The gash in his armor was more than just a flesh wound. The blow had reached something deeper, something vital. The warlord snarled in rage, his enormous hand swiping toward Jax's face, but Jax was already moving. A quick sidestep, and he was behind him, his blade flashing once more. The warlord turned, his roar of fury mingling with the shriek of pain. His armor was cracking, his strength beginning to falter under the human's relentless assault. "Impossible!" The warlord howled. How are you doing this?" Jax's face remained unreadable. "The same way I've done everything else. One step at a time." The warlord's movements were becoming slower, more deliberate, and Jax knew that the moment was near. He could feel it in the air, the shift, the hesitation in his opponent's eyes. And then, with one final, calculated strike, Jax drove his blade deep into the warlord's side, right into the heart of his weakness. The massive creature's eyes went wide in shock as his body crumpled under the weight of the blow. The arena erupted into silence. The warlord collapsed to the ground with a deafening thud, his armored body twitching once, then still. Jax stood over him, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of battle, his expression cold. The crowd was silent, but he could feel their disbelief radiating off them. He had done the impossible. He had killed the warlord. The tall, armored figure at the far end of the arena, the one who had watched it all unfold with a mixture of disbelief and contempt, finally spoke. His voice was deep, full of authority. "You've killed one of our greatest warriors." Jax met his gaze, unfazed. "Then you're next." Xylena's voice cut through the tension. She had been watching from the shadows, her eyes narrowed, her lips slightly parted. "This isn't just a fight, Jax. It's more. It's a message." Jax didn't turn to look at her. His eyes remained locked on the figure before him, the one who had watched him all this time. The one who thought he could control it all. "I'm the message," Jax said quietly. And as the figure in front of him stepped forward, Jax knew this was only the beginning. The arena's air was thick with anticipation, a palpable buzz vibrating through every corner of the stone walls. Jax stood at the center, the taste of victory still sharp on his tongue. The massive warlord lay sprawled across the floor, his life extinguished by Jax's relentless precision. The crowd had fallen silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. A human, a mere human, had defeated one of their mightiest champions. But Jax wasn't celebrating. This fight had been won, but the war had just begun. His victory was only a momentary reprieve, and he knew it. The true battle was yet to come. He wiped the blood from his blade and stepped away from the fallen warlord, his gaze never wavering from the shadowed figure emerging from the far end of the arena. It was larger than life, towering above the rest. The figure's presence exuded authority, a cold, implacable force that seemed to freeze the air around them. "I see the rumors are true," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant, the kind that commanded attention. "A human who thinks himself a warrior. But this is where your path ends." Jax's fingers tightened around his weapon, his knuckles pale beneath the grime of the arena. "I don't think anything. I know it." The figure stepped forward, his armor gleaming with a sinister glow. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Jax. "Your arrogance will be your undoing, human. The warlords you've killed, trivial. Nothing compared to what comes next." Jax didn't flinch. He had faced worse, and he had survived. But he knew something was different about this opponent. There was a weight to his words, a finality that lingered in the air. This wasn't just another test of strength. This was the reckoning. "You speak of finality," Jax replied, his voice steady, "but you haven't seen the end of me." The figure tilted his head, his lips curling into a thin smile. "We shall see." Before Jax could react, the figure moved, too fast for the human eye to follow. In the blink of an eye, the figure had crossed the distance between them, his gauntlet fist aimed directly for Jax's chest. Jax barely had time to raise his blade to block the blow, the force of the strike slamming him back several feet. His teeth clattered together, and the air was knocked from his lungs. The crowd erupted in cheers, their excitement a deafening roar, but Jax barely heard them. His mind was focused on the fight. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow that would have ended him on the spot. The figure didn't stop, his movements relentless, his strikes calculated to wear Jax down. "You're strong," Jax admitted, rising to his feet. "But strength alone isn't enough." The figure didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. His movements spoke for him. A series of fluid strikes followed, each one faster than the last. Jax ducked and weaved, the razor-sharp edge of the figure's blade grazing his shoulder. The wound was shallow, but it burned with the promise of pain. The battle was no longer about survival. Jax wasn't merely defending himself, he was learning. Every movement of his opponent was an opportunity to study, to adapt, to survive. But it was clear that this was unlike anything he had faced before. The figure was a master, a being forged in the heat of countless battles. The arena felt smaller with each passing second, the walls closing in around Jax as the figure pushed him toward the edge. Sweat dripped from his brow, his body aching from the barrage of blows, but he refused to relent. His survival instinct surged within him, a fire that would not be extinguished. "Is this the best you can do?" Jax taunted, his voice carrying through the arena. "I've faced worse." The figure's response was a vicious smile. "You haven't faced me." The next blow came without warning, a powerful strike that sent Jax stumbling backward. He regained his footing just in time to see the figure's sword coming down with blinding speed. Jax twisted, narrowly avoiding the strike, but he could feel the heat of the blade pass dangerously close to his side. His breath quickened, his mind racing. He was running out of time. Jax knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The figure was relentless, unyielding. He was too strong, too fast. But Jax had one advantage, the element of surprise. His eyes darted around the arena, searching for anything he could use. And then he saw it. A shard of metal, discarded from one of the earlier battles, gleamed in the dim light. It wasn't much, but it was enough. With a sudden burst of speed, Jax darted toward the shard, his body screaming with the effort. The figure followed, but by the time he reached the spot where Jax had been standing, the human was gone. The figure paused, his eyes scanning the arena. Jax was already moving. He slid behind the figure, using the environment to his advantage, positioning himself for a strike. He moved with the grace of a predator, quick and silent, his blade raised in preparation. The figure turned just in time to meet him head-on, but Jax was faster. The battle had shifted. In that single, fleeting moment, Jax found his opening. He lunged forward, his blade striking with precision, aimed directly for the figure's throat. The blow was clean, decisive. For a split second, there was nothing but silence. Then, with a sudden, deafening sound, the figure's armor cracked. The force of Jax's strike split the metal like paper, revealing the soft, vulnerable flesh beneath. The figure gasped, his hand flying to his neck as blood began to pool beneath his fingers. The crowd gasped, the realization of what had just happened dawning on them. The impossible had happened. Jax had won. The figure collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "How?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Jax stood over him, his chest heaving with exhaustion, but his expression remained impassive. "You should have listened." The figure's body trembled as he struggled to draw his final breaths. He reached for Jax's arm, but his hand faltered, falling limp at his side. Jax didn't move. He didn't need to. The battle was over. And Jax had won.